Joining me today is Christine Silverstein, author of Wrestling Through Adversity. Since the Dark Ages, mental health treatment has evolved from inhumane practices like chaining individuals with mental illness to walls and darkness to more modern approaches. Yet, in the United States emergency rooms today, young people in emotional crisis are still effectively held in hostage in the name of psychiatric care. We remain tethered to an outdated biomedical model of mental health. And ironically, the current mental health crisis, immense in scope, offers a glimmer of hope. It is forcing society to wake up. And as we witness the collapse of our mental health care system, especially in its failure to support youth and everyday people, we are finally beginning to acknowledge the urgent need for change. That's where Dr. Christine Silverstein comes in. She demonstrates how to become empowered and resilient through compelling examples from her personal life and clinical practice as a hypno-coach. She's also a behavioral health registered nurse. Welcome to the show, Christine. Nice to have you on today.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Okay, so we have an antiquated mental health system. We've got to go forward, be proactive, and do something different, which is what you've been saying and what you've written about in your book. And I guess the main thing here is that we need young people who are resilient, and we need to understand that mental health is integral to our overall health. And
Yes.
yeah, okay, so let's start with that. Mental
Yes.
health. Yeah, okay.
Yes. Well, mental health has always been separate from physical health, still is today. You go to a psychiatrist or a psychologist for mental treatment, for mental health. And you go to the physical doctor, if you have something like a diagnosis of cancer. And we maintain that from the 17th century, where Rene Descartes said the mind and body are separate. And we still follow that through. As evidence today, we have high rates of mental health issues with teenagers and young adults, and even children as young as 2 during the pandemic. So we need to move forward with training for resilience. Otherwise, we're doomed to repeat history, going back to the history of psychiatry, where we chained people to walls and we had lobotomies and other really harmful treatments in all and under the guise of hope for the future. So I say we need to work now with a paradigm shift, and that's what I'm doing with the presentation of my book, but also my work over the past 29 years, working with young adults, children, and teenagers. But I also work with adults, helping them to move through health issues as well and to be resilient so they can help their children, while they're helping themselves.
But in the book, as I understand it, you focus on what, Gen Z? You do focus on youth and what we can do.
Yes,
Yeah.
I focus on all 3 areas because and somebody just yesterday asked me on a podcast, well, why did you write the book about Gen Zs? Why did you include young adults? And my answer was young adults have lost their way. They even say it themselves, the lost generation, because we haven't really supported them. They were born around the time of 9/11, and they lived their whole lives with terrorism, school shootings, and the like, which is really a challenge to your mental health. And so I work with them to help them move forward through college. After all, the leading cause of death in college is suicide. And we tend to put that aside when we're thinking about sending our children off to college. But we don't really help them to develop before they're 18 years old and they're going off to college. So we send them instead maybe to war, to support our war efforts. So my idea is that the brain doesn't develop until you're about 25 years old, and it starts around 12 years old, where the both sides of the brain are developing links, and they expand the brain in that way, not in size, but in linkages. And with that, you can actually work with teenagers very easily to show them what to do using the power of their minds. As a hypnotherapist, that's my goal, to show them what to do to get in the zone so they can perform, they can be resilient, and they can use the mindful toughness skill sets that I developed to help them through any situation, including working in athletics, with performing artists, helping them academically, and also working with business for young adults, and most of all, mental health, the promotion of mental health.
But let's get back to the mind body thing, because you say that, that we've separated the mind from the body. As social workers, though, we always talked about the gestalt, the whole picture, which I think includes mind body. That's my background, obviously, social work. But so how do you start connecting the two? I mean, I think in the introduction, I said, we send kids for counseling, we send them to the psychiatrist. But if they go to get a checkup, let's say, what are you saying? The significant years are 12 to 24. We don't talk about their mental health. We just focus on the physical health, right? And so,
yes,
yeah.
the physical health. And also, we ignore the fact of what's going on in society. And we have these young people growing up, they're going to be the leaders in the future. And we really the older generations need to work with the younger generation, so that we can teach them what to do, what to know, conflict resolution. The Gen Zs have empathy for example, the people in Palestine, and we need to show them what to do to use their gifts and talents, and to have a better life, of lifestyle, in which they can incorporate things like meditation in the workplace, which seems very foreign to people these days. Even when you talk about the recent shooting in New York City, how the people in that building can really use some positive self-talk and resilience after that incident. But we don't think of that. We just think, well, we have to get ahead, we have to have our careers, and it's very hard in the job market, especially for young adults graduating from college. So I focus on that when I work with young adults and help them to use the power of their mind through their imagination, and also through metaphors, because their brains are developing so they can understand these things, and then use them very wisely to win in life, whatever winning means to them.
Okay, so they have to have a certain skill, and you teach them these skill sets so that they can, I'm using the word wrestle, which it sounds tough, wrestle through adversity, right? And
Yes.
so be able to do that. But you know what I always think of, Christine, though, you think about all the horrific stuff that happens. We don't have to list them all, but you just mentioned one example in New York City. But what about the people and the kids who went through World War II and World War One and all of those? I mean, there's always been adversity, different kinds of,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes, there has been adversity, of course, when you think of the concentration camps, and people right now experiencing it in Gaza. But we know that the greatest storms make the best sailors. So we have to understand that throughout life. It's not just when you get older you start to wrestle with it. And wrestling, of course, is a metaphor, but I actually work with wrestlers in my programs. So I use that very much as a metaphor, but also actually wrestling. We use that terminology with politics and healthcare issues, that we're always wrestling with something. So the idea is that you learn it beforehand. You learn it possibly when you're a child. Your parents teach you these things, how to look at things in a positive way, how to use your imagination, which sometimes is turned off in childhood, because in my case, I was great with imagining, even in geometry class when I was in high school, I happened to sit on the left side of the classroom that faced the ocean. I would just daydream watching the ships go by. and the sparkling water. And then the geometry teacher would ask me a question and I wouldn't know how to answer it. But everybody told me, well, she imagines too much. Well, I think that's essential. One of the skills I teach is called mental rehearsal. And neuroscientists are now showing that if you practice a skill at night before you go to sleep, you have a wrestling match the next day, and you're practicing your moves in your mind's eye, well, the brain responds in a way as if you're actually doing it. And so the next day you can feel confident that you will perform your move, release it automatically, just as you have practiced in your mind. That is, if you know how to do it physically. But that is so powerful, and we're not really using that or teaching our children to do that and how to project in the future and future pacing. See yourself graduating from college, and then in your mind's eye, you already have your cap and gown on, but you're just starting the first day of college, And I did that when I was in nursing school. I entered when I was 16 and I really wanted to do well. I was the youngest person in my class. And when I went to an interview in Brooklyn, I didn't know anything about nursing. I hardly knew how babies were born, at that time. And I became a nurse because I saw that picture of myself from day one. I had the cap on and I was graduating. And and you had to be when I went for my interview, the director of the school said, but why are you only 16? And I thought for a moment, and I think I had a little angel on my shoulder to say, I don't know, I guess I'm smart. You have to be 18 to come to this school, but they let me into the school. So I projected that I was becoming a nurse and that was it. I was going to help people.
When you talk about wrestling through adversity, though, how do you do that today when you have parents who are so connected to their kids, talking to them every day, whether they're in college or even when they get to college, who are constant or so involved in their kids' lives, helping them to make decisions. Adversity is a word that they kind of, I think, parents today, this is my observation, shy away from and
Yes,
don't allow their kids to get out there and wrestle with adversity. They want to protect them from adversity. That seems to be
that's right.
the going, yeah. So,
Well, I had an experience just recently, which is very interesting because when I work with children and teenagers, of course, I work with parents along with parents. But there was this one case recently where it's a wrestler and he's in high school. He just got his driver's license, and also he just went to his first prom. And his mother called me and said that her son was, she found vaping and she found, equipment in his room, and he was maybe he was drinking at prom, and also she reported that he he wasn't doing the best on the wrestling mat. He lost a match that he should have won. But the parent was very connected, very loving, but she didn't realize that she didn't put herself in her son's place. So they came to my office, the father as well, who had been a wrestler in high school. And they were sitting there on one sofa, and this young 17-year-old was sitting on another sofa in my office. And I was asking them, so why, to the parents, so why are you bringing your son here? And they were going on and on. And they said that he has all this mental health issues. And I said, well, we're not psychiatrists here. So we'll just talk about what is. And then you could see the teenager just kind of shrivel up. And here's this very powerful, muscular person sitting there who looks like an adult. He shaves, and he has, a mature look on his face. And he's very strong and he's been very successful as a wrestler. But now he lost this match and he's looking down, and his parents are really um, kind of like hitting him below the belt. And so as I talked and I told the parents, so how do you feel, Dad? And he told me, and then the mom, how do you feel? And she expressed her concerns. And then I asked the wrestler, so what about you? How do you feel? And he was very quiet. He said, yes, I didn't win that match, and he was kind of looking down. But when I brought him into my inner office to talk to him and to work with him, he said that the match that he was in, he lost, yes, and something happened to him that had never happened to him before. And that was his knees got very weak. He couldn't stand up and he couldn't breathe because he took down his opponent right away. And then he didn't know what to do after that. So, so the parents overlooked that fact. And so he told me one very important thing, that that wrestling match was very good for him because he learned he could take down this opponent. Now he has to figure out what to do after that. So he blossomed after that. After even one session, he went to a tournament and he did very well. And I just contacted him recently, and he's so happy. He got a job, and he went to a tournament and he won every match. He defeated everybody, so he feels very good about himself. It's just a change in focus. And I tell the parents on the first visit, I suggest that they both they have school parenting, and I tell them that your son has to grow into his, in this case, his wrestling shoes. And I always ask the parents, so what would you do when your child was young and he was going back to school? What would you do with his sneakers and with his wrestling shoes? Would you keep the same shoes from the year before? And they always say, "Oh no, no, his foot would have grown, and I would have gotten him new shoes, right?" And I would say that your son is not going to grow into his wrestling shoes. Right now, he's walking around with very tight shoes, and he needs to feel like they're more roomy, like clown shoes. But he'll tell you, today I fit right into my shoes, and yesterday they were a little tight, and tomorrow he might say, now my shoes feel a little bit big. Dad, can you talk to me about what happened in that match?" And so it works out beautifully. And when the parents begin to take the back seat, because a lot of times this teenagers I work with, they're getting to a point where they're going to be in the driver's seat. They're getting their license, and they need to be in control and tell the parents, okay, take the back seat. I know what I'm doing, but when I need help, I can ask for it. And I think that's a very important lesson. So in this case, the mom is very happy with the results because I texted her and she said that her son is doing great and she's so happy. And that's just with 2 sessions. So so much more can be done.
Well, it sounds very simple, but it's
Yes.
not always so simple, and that's
Mhm.
one example. But I'm sure there are many others that aren't so simple. But what do
Yes.
you talk about? I guess mindful toughness. That's
Yes.
a term you use, and how do you, is I mean, how do you and getting into the zone? What does that
Mhm.
mean?
Well, as I mentioned, I'm a hypnotherapist. So I have techniques that I use with my clients, but I teach self-hypnosis. So I show them what to do. And then when they're in a situation, they can use it. And by the way, these skills are portable. I call it mindful toughness, and I have a trademark with that term because I used to call it what everybody else called it, mental toughness. And I even, mentioned that in as a columnist for a wrestling publication. But when I said that to some people, they said, "Well, what do you mean? You're saying my son has a mental problem?" And and that happened often enough. And I decided to call it mindful toughness because I have been practicing meditation and mindfulness for 30 years. And I used it many years ago when I had challenges becoming pregnant. I had 4 miscarriages, and the doctor told me that I would never hold a baby in my arms because of these miscarriages. And he told me to take a very toxic drug, DES, which I didn't take, thank goodness, because I knew it caused cancer. Right. So
Yep.
I meditated and I did my self-hypnosis, and I had 4 healthy babies after that. So so it's very powerful for me. So that's what I teach, to get in the zone. And what I do, and the first step is I call it breathing easy. And so my clients will sit in a chair, and I have a recliner in my office, but I show them how to do this at home. because you need to be relaxed and at ease, especially when you're working in a sport or you're in a piano recital. You need to be right there in the zone. So it's just about sitting in a chair, putting your feet, if you're sitting in a chair at home, putting your feet flat on the floor, and then beginning to focus on a spot in front of you. It's called eye fixation. It could be, I use a happy face in my office, but you can use a picture on the wall at home or even a doorknob. And so you're focusing on that and you start to take deep breaths, breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth. And as you exhale, you say the word easy to yourself. And then the second inhalation is the same thing. You breathe in, you breathe out, you say easy to yourself. And on the third exhalation, you breathe in, you hold your breath, you count backwards, 3, 2, 1, you breathe out, you say easy. In the meantime, you also have your fingers, circling your fingers as a focusing tool. So
So
now
you
you're
have,
in
so
that.
because we don't have
Yes,
that much time, so I wanted
yes,
and to go through
yes,
each one of the well, I'm calling them the
mindful
mental
toughness skill
the
sets.
mental fitness, the mental rehearsals. Positive self-talk is another one. All of
Yes,
these, yeah. So you're just I guess you're empowering these these
yes,
young people,
yes. It's
empowering.
very empowering.
Yeah.
And as I said, the teenagers do great with this. They say, "Why didn't anybody ever tell me this before?" It's so useful, to take SATs, to be able to get in the college of your choice, to believe in yourself. Like this young wrestler I just spoke about, I was so empowered just by knowing. He said he used the techniques and they work. And that makes a big difference. If you believe they work, then you're going to use them more and more, if you're
Now you do
successful.
something else. I know you mentioned earlier that you're a nurse, right?
Yes,
And you focus on behavioral health, mind, body, which we've been talking about healing through innovative programs. I'm reading this like Operation Heal. What is Operation Heal?
yes. Operation Heal is a program I developed many years ago, and it really started when I had 4 cesarean sections and the spinal anesthesia didn't work. So I had to figure out ways to help myself to get through these surgeries and to be healthy. But I began working when I began working with clients in 1996. They would come to me. Sometimes they would have, like one man had prostate cancer. He was going through treatments, and other people had injuries. Like wrestlers it's very common to have injuries, and from other sports. And they would come to me as clients. They wanted to do better in their sport. They wanted to do better at their jobs, and they weren't feeling well. So I began to incorporate these skill sets into their sessions. So now I use it for people who say, I'm having this upcoming surgery. I have an example in my book of a 59-year-old woman I helped years ago. I just contacted her and she's doing fine as far as physical health goes. But um, they would come and they'd have injuries and knee injuries, hip injuries, elbow injuries, and so they still wanted to participate in the sport. They had permission from the doctor, but they had to have surgery after the season was over. So I work with them using imagery, healing imagery, and actually made a video of it called Operation Heal. It's on my Young Navigator YouTube channel, and where I helped a wrestler to be able to use his shoulder, even though it was very painful and his fingers were numb. But he really excelled and placed at the state championship, regardless of his issues. As long as they have permission from the physician, I work with them in that way. So it's using imagery, using metaphors for healing, and really getting into the healing zone in which so
So in
many
other
people
words, you
can.
help reduce the stress that is associated with healing before the surgery,
Yes,
during the surgery, and after the surgery. And
that's right. So
yeah,
that
and
you already see yourself healed before you start the surgery, which is really an amazing thing because the surgeon can just do so much. If you ask any surgeon, they can say, well, I'll do the surgery and you'll be fine. but sometimes they wonder, well, why isn't this person healing? I work with a young girl. She was 9 years old, and this is in my book as well, where she had what they were calling disordered eating. And the reason she had it was she had an appendectomy coming right off the soccer field. She scored 2 goals and then she collapsed and they brought her to the hospital. She had an appendectomy and she healed physically, but she didn't heal emotionally. And so I worked with her. And by the time she came to me some months later, she had a nasogastric tube and she was being fed by that by her mother, who's hysterical, and she wouldn't take any liquids on her own. And she had cardiac arrhythmia and electrolyte imbalance, and she almost died. So her mother called me to help. And I used imagery. I used a bird nest with 3 birds because she was mute. She wouldn't talk when she first came. So the birds spoke her language and this little puppet that I have, and I use bird sounds.
And
Also,
now
I
we have to
use
stop you there and let people read the book and don't tell
yes,
us what happened. We'll,
okay,
because we have a couple minutes left, and I do want you to
yes,
give us, yeah, a website and or other platforms to go to so that we can get more information and about what you're doing and about your programs.
yes. Okay, well, you can reach me at the Summit Center for Ideal Performance. My websites are idealperformance.net and drchristinesilverstein.com. That's one relating to my book. It has the chapters of my book and other things about my book. And I have the Young Navigator YouTube channel, and I'm on Facebook and also on LinkedIn. I write a column, a blog every week, and also I write a LinkedIn newsletter every week, so you can connect with me on those in those ways as well.
Great.
And I
Yeah.
have in office, and also I work online.
Okay, Christine Silverstein and the author of Wrestling Through Adversity. Thanks so much for being on the show today. Lots of
Oh,
information
you're
to
welcome,
process.
and
Yes.
you can find it on Amazon and other
Okay,
places where books are sold.
great. Thanks. Joining me today is Anthony Silliard, author of Love and Suffering: Break the Emotional Chains That Prevent You from Experiencing Love. We grow up in believing in fairy tales, soulmates, happily ever after, love that conquers all, but in reality, uh, paints a different picture. More than 70% of new relationships end every year. Why do so many people seem to be in a cycle that keeps repeating this? Is real love possible? Well, Anthony Silliard reveals a powerful but often overlooked truth. Many relationships don't fail because of incompatibility, but because of unforgiven pain. We carry emotional wounds, grief, and guilt from past relationships into new ones, unconsciously sabotaging the very intimacy we crave. Anthony explores how healing and forgiveness of others and ourselves can become the foundation for deep, lasting love. With compelling research, personal stories, and actionable tools, he offers readers a roadmap for transforming suffering into connection. He's a professor of leadership and the director of the Center for Sustainable Leadership at the Luis Business School in Rome. And he has provided leadership development, coaching, and training to the world's largest nonprofits, including GE, Disney, Nokia, Bank of America, and the American Red Cross, and I could go on and on. Let's talk to Anthony. Welcome to the show. Nice to have you on today.
Thank you for having me here, Kathryn. It's an honor.
Okay, so the beginning, it's kind of like, I don't know if it's mind blowing because I think this is what I suspected, but 70% of new relationships end every year. So you're saying it's not the reason that we think they end is not really the reason, right? We're just wounded, unforgiven pain. Let's talk about unforgiven pain.
Sure. Well, I mean, there are some relationships that end just because of lack of compatibility. So I don't think it's always has to do with sort of unforgiven suffering. But I think a lot of the times, probably the majority of the times, the way we show up in a relationship is stemming from how we've been hurt in the past and and this actually came, Kathryn, from leadership coaching I was doing with CEOs, senior leaders, and I realized that each one, the challenges they were facing in their organizations, always related to someone they had never forgiven in their past. And then I sort of kind of going forward from there and extrapolating, I realized that the same is true in our relationships. Like each of us has someone we have never been able to forgive, if not more than one person. And that lack of forgiveness keeps us stuck and keeps us sort of looking at the relationship in a very unidimensional way, where we're essentially judging the new person that we're seeing based on how they measure up compared to that person that we never forgave before.
So you're saying in a love relationship or an intimate relationship, we had a bad experience, whatever happened, we don't forgive that person. And so the next relationship, we're bringing all that baggage into that relationship, and that's what prevents us from having a positive, intimate relationship with the next person.
Yeah, I mean, I see. So I do a lot of research on loneliness in organizations and generally, and what I've realized from this research is that there are three fundamental human needs. When any one of these goes unmet, we feel lonely. So one is the need to connect, the need for emotional connection with others. One's the need to belong, to feel like we're part of a group, we feel appreciated, valued, included. And the other is the need to contribute, to feel like we're making an impact in the world in a way that matters to us with other people. And I think what happens is when we show up in a relationship, a relationship is a mirror into the soul. A new relationship essentially brings up all that past trauma that we would rather forget, and when we haven't processed it, it just comes right out. So I'll give you an example. Like, my parents divorced. I'll give my personal example. My parents divorced when I was 5, and when they told me that they were going, I'm turning 58 in a few days, so it was a long time ago.
Okay.
But when they told me they were going to divorce as a 5-year-old, I told them, no, you don't need to do that. Like, I'll fix everything. Don't worry. And of course, that didn't work. So I carried with me like this really like deep pain inside of me, that the two people that I counted on and that I felt like what they shared was love, well, it turned out that it was something different, and I sort of felt strongly this sense of betrayal between them, and so I carried forward in my life, like always, and whenever I would date a new woman, it would always be, okay, well, is she trustworthy? Is she stable? Because I judged my mother as being unstable for leaving my father. And so that was the lens through which I saw every relationship. And the challenge is that when we see a human being through one lens of one character quality, in this case it's stable or unstable, what we end up doing is we say, well, well, so she was unstable, therefore I'm going to be stable. And so we sort of, in my case, become I became like kind of unconditionally supportive of the person I was seeing, thinking I'm going to be so stable that that this is going to work. I'm not going to be like my mother. Now the problem is that instead of really developing a relationship based on my like internal values and what I really held dear, what's really important to me, it was a reaction. And in fact, it was a reaction based on a judgment of my mother, which really was sort of limiting her to one character quality when she had many others. And then I carried that with me, and you know, all the way up until I was 40, I couldn't really find a relationship and sustain it. And it was always the same thing. It was always like, okay, well, as soon as this other person shows any inkling of not being stable, I'm out of there. And that's just one example. I mean, I see so many of these examples with my clients,
But
and
I want to stick to the example with you. So, okay, so up
sure.
until you're 40, you went from one relationship to the other and you couldn't sustain it because of what you just described. So then what happened when you were 40 how did you sort of realize that this was happening? And I'm making the assumption, maybe I'm wrong, that you've now been able, you're 58 or almost, happy birthday, but you're going to be able to, that you have sustained a relationship or you have been able to do that.
Well, so just before I turned 40, I met this woman. Her name is Carla, and I met her in Mexico, in a town called San Miguel de Allende, and we developed a relationship, became really fell in love with each other, and I went back to where I was living in Washington D.C., where I was doing all my leadership training, and so after, you know, we she didn't have a visa yet to come to the U.S., so we would meet in Canada and we would meet in Mexico, and that went on for about 10 months, and then finally she came to Washington, and um, so while she was there, I thought to myself, okay, well, before we live together, I need to really prove that she's stable and that we're stable. And so I want to wait like 2 years. After that, I'll propose. And, you know, seeing the relationship continues to grow the way it has, then I'll propose after those 2 years. So during those, I never got to the 2 years because within a year, she had left me 3 times. And so she sensed that I had this wound of abandonment and betrayal. And so I would push her to act that out. Like I would say, for example, if she was saying that she was unhappy, which she often was, because imagine this is a woman who, like you, has a background in social work and psychology, and she was running a psychology clinic in Mexico. She comes to Washington, is learning English, and really doesn't have much status in U.S. society, and so it's kind of counting on me. But I'm saying, well, wait, before we live together, like we should be together 2 years. And so in the end, I was showing her that she couldn't count on me. And then whenever we had a problem and she was expressing her unhappiness, I would say, well, this is typical of someone who has like an abandonment issues. Like, well, if you're unhappy, you don't have to stay, that kind of thing. Like I would say those things because I'm like, okay, well, let's see if she proves that she's really there for me. But then I was pushing her away. So that went on. She left me those 3 times. After we were then broken up for a year and a half, because each time she wanted to get back together, like a few weeks later. And the third time I was like, I had that saying in my, etched in my mind, yeah, you hurt me once, shame on you. You hurt me twice, shame on you. You hurt me a third time, shame on me. Right. And so
Yep.
I wasn't going to get back together. And then during that year and a half, well, I was distraught because this is the woman I loved. And I remember I went to a meditation retreat. It was a mindfulness retreat in Colorado, Estes Park. And there I was, and I'm like, I'm sharing basically a trailer with like 9 other guys, okay, in bunk beds. And I don't know anyone. And I remember one day I'm there and I go for a walk in the mountains nearby, and I'm just looking out at the at the mountaintops and the panoramic view, and it just hit me. I was like, I cannot be abandoned. Like, I'm not a child anymore. Like, a child can be abandoned for sure, but now I'm an adult man. Like how is it that I have this fear of abandonment that's ruining my life when relationships are born, they grow, they decay, and they die, and that's just a natural cycle. And so I kind of came back with a very different view. And I had been teaching collaborative communication to many organizations, companies, and the way I taught it started changing completely. I really, instead of being theory, it was really kind of kind of like, how can you identify the unmet needs of the other person, because I felt like I had never been able to do that with her. And all of a sudden it's like, I have like more demand than I've ever had in my life for these kinds of workshops, and people just can't get enough of them. And people are writing me. I'm getting multiple emails daily about how they're changing their lives from these workshops, because it's not theory anymore. Now it's really about, how do you understand the unmet needs of another person, and help them to share those with you and help them to meet them. So then I go back to Mexico. I deliberately don't see her until the night before I'm leaving, because I'm like, I don't want to get entangled in this again. This has been after a year and a half. So or it was the second 2 nights before I was leaving. And so we see each other. She, essentially we have dinner. I'm, keeping a distance. The next morning I go to the gym, and on the way back I'm driving home and I break into tears. And I come home and I realize, like I probably will never see her again. And this is the woman I love. And I call her, and as I'm calling her, she's calling me. It's like we finally had this synergy. And it's like this silence on the line. And I say, I say, I love you. And she's like, well, I love you. And then there's the silence. And then she's like, should I come over? Like, yes, please. So she comes over. She comes to the door. And again, it's like, I love you. I love you. And then when she says, I love you, I said, well, you loved me before, but you weren't getting what you needed in the relationship. Let's sit down and talk about that, and how you could get what you need. So you would feel like you would feel satisfied in our relationship. We sat down, we agreed we're going to give it another try. Within 6 months, if things are going well, we're going to get engaged, and within a year of that, we're going to get married. Well, we ended up getting engaged 2 months later and married about 6 months after that, and we've been now married for over 14 years and have 2 children. And it's not, I'm not going to be here to tell all your listeners, hey, marriage is perfect and now everything is like, it's kind of like, the horse riding off into the sunset. It is not perfect, but it's wonderful, and it's perfect for me. Like uh, I've working through a lot of these issues and realizing. So for me, that was that issue of stability and betrayal. That was the core issue. But for another person, I coach many people on these issues, and for some it could be, for example, it could be someone who never forgave she never forgave her father, who never sent her to private schools, who was kind of miserly, didn't want to spend any of his money. And so then she ends up being like extremely generous, and she judges his father as being insensitive, as being miserly, and frugal, too frugal. And then she becomes spendthrift and generous. And next thing you know, she's in a lot of debt. And then what does she do? She ends up going right back to what she judged her father for being. She has to become extremely frugal herself. And so one of the quotes in Love and Suffering is, whatever you judge, you already are, or you will become. And that's what happens, because in my case, everything was about stability. But what about other important relationship qualities like empathy, attentiveness, compassion, flexibility? It's like we focus on just one character quality. We judge another person for having done that. We're never able to forgive them. And then every single relationship, it's that same drama, that same issue that we're trying to work out.
So when you're doing that, so who are the people that you, or the emotional makeup of of those that you're having these connections with? You know, I mean, you're drawn to certain people because of your issue, say your issue with your mother and this other person's issue with their father, because there has to be another side to it, right? Like you're continually seeking out people who, for what, that have issues that connect with, not positive, but that issues that connect with yours. Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, absolutely. Yeah. So it's interesting because there's what we want and there's what we need. So in my case, what I wanted was like a really exciting, engaging, interesting woman. But then what I was seeking, what I needed was a woman who was stable. So I would end up with like a woman where maybe the relationship was very like not so exciting, very kind of like stable but dull, and would be not really happy with it. So then it didn't work out. And then I would run the other direction for like a woman who's more wild and crazy. And I think a lot of us, we all we know love to be is the love that we experienced in earlier in our lives, usually with we have the term significant other. Your first significant other is usually your parent of the opposite sex, and that's what we associate love to be. And then over time we have to replace that significant other with our that's our sort of our significant other of origin. We then have to replace that with a significant other of destination, which is very different. It's like Marshall Goldsmith, the executive coach. He once says, what got you here won't get you there. And I think that's what happens. We just get stuck in our routines. We keep, and there's that saying, if you keep doing what you've been doing, you'll keep getting what you've been getting. And we just get it over and over and over again. The form changes, but in the end, it's the same dynamics. So we play them out over and over. And because we are either unable or unwilling to take the time to process and figure out, like, hey, what am I doing here? How am I showing up in relationships? And then, another really unfortunate thing, Kathryn, is that we let loneliness be our guide. And when we feel lonely, there's a lot of research, that I'm doing that and others that we don't exercise very good judgment when we're lonely. So we tend to make poor decisions. We tend to enact the same types of relationships over and over again, instead of coming to a place of solitude, I think, which is kind of a precursor. That's the independence. That's the precursor of interdependence. And so, one way to think about it is that all of us are alone sometimes. Like aloneness is objective. Like if you go into a room tonight and you're sleeping in a bed by yourself, you are alone. So the aloneness is objective, but when there's an emotional charge associated with being alone, that's what creates loneliness or solitude. So the way that I tend to say it is loneliness is a negative, distressing emotion associated with being alone. Solitude is a positive, strengthening emotion associated with being alone. So it's not a being alone that undoes us. It's our relationship with ourselves and our capacity to develop that relationship so we can transform that loneliness into solitude.
You talk at what point, I mean, besides reading your book, or in addition to reading your book, do we have to get to the point where we need to have a coach, a counselor, somebody to help us, or can this become just a spontaneous? At what point should we begin to realize that this is what is guiding us? I say, in terms of the people that we choose to be with or choose, not have to wait until there's a crisis.
Yeah, well, we need other people, whether they're in the form of a coach or a counselor or a good friend. We can't just figure it all out on our own. It would be nice, but I think what we all try to do in this life is balance togetherness and separateness. And solitude we can experience in that separateness. But if anyone who tells you, "Oh, I love to be alone," it's like, okay, why don't you go spend a week by yourself and then let's talk about it, because there's this threshold effect where it's like, okay, now I need to be with others. And then if some of the loneliest people are always in a crowd. So being with others all the time is not the way out of loneliness. It's this balancing togetherness and separateness. And I think, not all coaches or psychologists are created equal, so finding someone who really can attune to you and help, and also challenge you and help you to uncover what are the sort of habitual patterns you have that are taking your life in the wrong direction. Like, each of us has to make a decision. Do we want to live the life we've inherited or the life we create? And this idea, it's a very American ideal of like creating that life autonomously, independently of others, but it's just not possible. Like all the, from everything I've seen, all the top leaders, they always had people around them that they could go to that would help them from going like too far out into an extreme. And I've done that myself. I've seen other leaders do that where they derail. And so we need other people. We need to find those who, when you're talking with someone, is this beneficial? Is this helping me? Is this helping me move on my path of personal development? I have I'm going to offer this to your listeners in a while, but I have a book called The Myth of Friendship, a free book I'm going to give to your listeners. And one of the concepts in there is that we tend to choose friends that we like, and that's positive, but it's not enough. We need to choose friends that we like and that we want to be like, because what I've seen is that friendships and even intimate relationships, in even coworker relationships, they only endure when each person has something the other needs. So that means that when for your listeners out there, when you're choosing who to spend your time with, it should be someone that in some dimension of the relationship, they are better than you, and you learn from them and you move in their direction. And for
Would
the
that be
relationship,
called, we only have 3 minutes left, but I have to ask you, is transactional? Relationships are transactional? Some people don't like to use that term, but it kind of sounds like it as you're describing it.
I think I would say it was transactional if we were talking about the currency of like money and social support and those kind of things. Like, hey, this person picks up my kids from school and that person lends me money when I need it. But that's not what I'm talking about. I think it's more transformational, where we move toward developing the character qualities we need to have what I call CMSRs, compassionate, meaningful, sustainable relationships. And so we have other people who kind of mentor us, but then we also mentor them in another dimension. It may be, for example, that Kathryn, you have I don't use an example. I'll say my own. I may have a friend, for example, where this guy is super steady and consistent and kind, and I learn a lot from him about how to be those qualities. Whereas, like, I'm more of a risk taker, I'm more innovative, and he likes that. He learns from me how to step out of his box. He's 75 and he steps out of his box more and tries new things and travels more, and so we kind of balance each other out.
Yeah, I'm going to stop you there. That sort of describes, I think, my relationship with my partner of almost 40 years. Okay, so we only have a couple minutes left. So, Anthony, give us all the information that, websites, platforms, whatever, or links to go to get more information about what we've been talking about your book.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
Well, so Love and Suffering is available on Amazon. That's an easy one. But for these two free books, one is called The Myth of Happiness: How Your Definition of Happiness Creates Your Unhappiness. The second is called The Myth of Friendship: How Your Misunderstandings About Friendship Keep You Lonely. Those two free books your listeners can access by going to theartoflivingfree.org. That's the website I have for my personal blog and so forth. Theartoflivingfree.org, and then /free happiness and friendship books. So it's theartoflivingfree.org/free happiness and friendship books.
Great having you on the show today. Love and Suffering. Oh, I just want to mention the title of the book again: Love and Suffering: Break the Emotional Chains That Prevent You from Experiencing Love. Good show. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathryn. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Me too.